My name is Elena Voss. I'm 34 years old. And the house I bought was supposed to be my fresh start. It wasn't. The day I pulled that first letter from behind the wall, my hands were covered in plaster dust and my heart was doing something I still can't describe. Because the letter had my mother's name on it, written by someone who had been dead for 30 years. I stood in that empty hallway alone, holding a secret that wasn't meant for me. And I didn't know yet that finding it would cost me everything I thought was true about my family, my blood, and who I actually am. Before I tell you what actually happened, if you're new here, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps more than you know. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? I always read them. Now, let me take you back to the day I got the keys. What if the house you just bought was never really for sale, but was waiting for you specifically? I didn't ask that question the morning I got the keys. I was too busy convincing myself I'd made the smartest decision of my life. The house sat at the end of Callaway Lane. White shutters. Wide porch. A price so far below market value that my realtor laughed nervously when she handed me the paperwork. I didn't laugh. I signed. Moving day came fast. First box through the door, I stopped. The air inside felt used. Not stale. Not old. Used. Like someone had just left the room before I walked in. I told myself it was an old house. Old houses breathe differently. But then I noticed the walls. One panel near the staircase, slightly off. Like it had been opened before. Recently. I ran my fingers along the edge. It moved. I told myself it was nothing. I closed it. Walked away. But that night, I couldn't sleep. And I kept thinking about one thing. Why was a house this beautiful sold this cheap? Nobody sells a house like this without a reason. I went back to that panel the next morning. Coffee still in my hand. Telling myself I was just being paranoid. I wasn't. The panel came loose with one pull. Behind it, a narrow gap between the drywall and the original brick. Dark. Dusty. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a plastic sleeve that had yellowed with age, a bundle of letters tied with kitchen string. My coffee hit the floor. I didn't pick it up. I pulled the bundle out slowly, like it might fall apart in my hands. 7 letters. Maybe 8. All sealed. All addressed to the same person in handwriting so frantic the pen had torn through the paper in places. No stamps. Never mailed. Someone had written these letters and then hidden them inside a wall. I stood there asking myself one question. Who hides letters they never sent? Someone who couldn't send them. Someone who was afraid. I opened the first one. No date. No greeting. Just a single line at the top that made my stomach drop completely. It said, "She cannot know what her mother did." I read it 3 times. Then I looked around the empty house, suddenly very aware that I was alone. She cannot know what her mother did. I read that line until the words stopped looking like words. My mother. It had to be. Because the name written at the bottom of that letter, the name of the person it was written to, was Catherine Voss. My mother's name. I hadn't told my realtor my mother's name. I hadn't told anyone connected to this house anything about my family. I'd moved here from 3 states away. Clean break. Fresh start. No connections. So why did a letter hidden inside this wall know exactly who I was? My hands were shaking, but I kept reading. The letter was short. Barely a paragraph. But every line felt like a door slamming shut behind me. It spoke about a decision my mother made. A choice. Something that happened in this house, or near it, decades before I was born. It didn't say what the decision was. It just said it ruined everything. I checked the bottom for a signature. There was one. A single name, Margaret. I didn't know any Margaret. My mother had never mentioned anyone by that name. Not once. Not ever. But Margaret clearly knew us. And she'd been waiting inside these walls for someone to finally find her words. I should have called someone. A friend. My sister. Anyone. Instead, I opened the second letter. This one was different immediately. The handwriting was faster. Messier. Like Margaret had written it in the dark or written it scared, maybe both. No greeting. No name at the top. Just words that hit like cold water. If you're reading this inside that house, leave. Leave before you understand why I couldn't. I stood up straight. Read it again. She wasn't writing to my mother this time. She was writing to whoever found these letters. She was writing to me. Decades before I existed, she was writing directly to me. How do you prepare for that? You don't. I kept reading. Margaret wrote that the house had been in her family for 31 years. That she'd raised her children inside these walls. That she'd loved it once, genuinely loved it. Then something happened. She never named it directly. Just circled around it like it was too heavy to write plainly. She used one word repeatedly. Buried. Something had been buried. Something involving my mother. Something Margaret believed could never be undone. The letter ended mid-sentence. Like she'd stopped herself. Or been stopped. I put the letters in my kitchen drawer and drove into town. I needed a face. A real person. Someone who could tell me Margaret was just a lonely woman who wrote strange things and hid them in walls for no reason. Nobody gave me that. The first person I asked was the woman running the small grocery on Elm Street. I described the house. Said I'd just moved in. Mentioned Margaret's name casually, like it meant nothing. Her smile disappeared. She started reorganizing shelves that didn't need reorganizing. Don't know anyone by that name, she said. Back turned. Conversation over. I tried the gas station. The hardware store. A man walking his dog on Calloway Lane itself, 3 houses down from mine. Same reaction every time. Not confusion. Not curiosity. Discomfort. Immediate and practiced. Like they'd all agreed on it beforehand. The man with the dog was the most honest. He didn't pretend. He just looked at me, looked at my house, and said quietly, "You should have asked more questions before you bought that place." Then he walked away. No explanation. No look back. I stood on that street alone, realizing something that turned my stomach completely. This whole town knew something. And not one of them was going to tell me. I went home and opened my laptop. Margaret. The house address. Calloway Lane. I typed everything I had and started pulling threads. It took 40 minutes. Margaret Holloway. Born 1941. Resided at the Calloway Lane property from 1959 until 1991. 32 years in that house. Then nothing. No forwarding address. No obituary. No death record I could find in this state. She didn't die here. She just disappeared from the record. I dug deeper. She'd had 2 children. A son and a daughter. Both gone from this town before 1985. No trace of either one locally. The son had moved abroad. The daughter I couldn't find at all. Then I found a photograph. A local newspaper archive. 1974, a community fundraiser. Margaret Holloway standing in the 3rd row, tall, dark-haired, composed. Looking directly at the camera like she knew something everyone else in that photograph didn't. I zoomed in. And my breath stopped. Because standing directly beside Margaret Holloway in that photograph, young, maybe 19, smiling without knowing what was coming, was my mother, Catherine Voss. They weren't strangers. They were standing the way people stand when they've known each other for years. My mother had lied to me my entire life. I called my mother. She picked up on the 2nd ring. Cheerful. Normal. Asked if the new house was settling well. I said one word. Margaret. Silence. Not the silence of someone searching their memory. The silence of someone who just got caught. 3 full seconds of it before she said, "Where did you hear that name?" Not "Who is that?" Not "I don't know a Margaret." "Where did you hear that name?" I told her I'd found letters. Hidden in the walls. That Margaret had written them. That one of them had her name on it, Catherine Voss, written by someone who clearly knew her well. My mother's voice changed completely. She told me to throw them away. All of them. Without reading further. She said some things were better left alone and that old houses collect other people's problems like dust. I said it was too late. I'd already read too. She went quiet again. Then she said something that cracked something open inside me permanently. Elena. That house was never supposed to come back to our family. Back to our family. Not back on the market. Not back into circulation. Back to our family. Which meant one thing, this house had belonged to us before. And nobody had ever told me. I hung up on my mother. Went straight to the kitchen drawer. Pulled out the remaining letters. spread them across the table, and opened the third one with both hands steady, steadier than I expected. This letter was the longest. And the darkest. Margaret's handwriting was calm this time. Controlled. Like she'd waited until she was completely certain before putting this one on paper. She wrote that in 1969 my grandmother, not my mother, had made a transaction. Not a sale. Not a gift. A transaction. The house on Calloway Lane had been signed over under circumstances Margaret described as not willing on either side. I read that 4 times. Not willing on either side. My grandmother had given up this house without wanting to. And Margaret had taken it without wanting to either. Someone had forced them both. Margaret didn't name that person directly. Not yet. But she wrote that the arrangement had one condition attached. A condition that was supposed to die with the people who made it. Then she wrote the line that made me push back from the table. The child born that year was never supposed to know this house existed. The child born that year. I was born in 1990. This letter was dated 1989. I didn't sleep that night. By morning I was at the county records office the moment they unlocked the door. I gave them the address. Asked for the full ownership history of the Calloway Lane property. The clerk disappeared for 11 minutes. I counted. She came back with a thin folder and an expression that gave nothing away. I opened it at the counter. The house had changed hands 4 times between 1961 and 1991. Standard enough. But the 1969 transfer, the one Margaret had described, had a document attached that stopped me cold. It wasn't a deed of sale. It was a legal agreement. Binding. Notarized. Signed by my grandmother, Eleanor Voss, and a man whose name I didn't recognize, a solicitor acting on behalf of someone unnamed in the document. A third party. Hidden behind legal language, so dense it took me 10 minutes to understand what I was reading. My grandmother had signed away this house in exchange for something. Not money. Silence. She had traded the house for someone's permanent silence about something that had happened here. Something the document carefully never named. I photographed every page. Walked back to my car. Sat there staring at my grandmother's signature. A woman I'd loved completely written in a hand that looked nothing like someone acting freely. It looked like someone who had no choice. I got home and noticed the car immediately. Dark. Parked just past the end of Calloway Lane. Engine off. Nobody visibly inside, but the windows were tinted just enough that I couldn't be certain. It hadn't been there this morning. I went inside. Locked the door. Told myself it was nothing, a visitor for one of the neighbors. Someone waiting for someone else. An hour later it was still there. I called my sister Diane. Told her everything. The letters. The photograph. The county records. My mother's reaction on the phone. All of it in one long breath. Diane was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Elena, someone called me last week asking if you'd moved into that house yet." My stomach dropped. I asked who. She didn't know. Private number. She'd assumed it was a moving company or utility service. Hadn't thought twice about it. I thought about it now. Someone had known I was moving in before I'd told anyone locally. Someone had been tracking this. Watching for the moment I'd arrive at that address and start asking questions. I went to the window and looked at the car. This time someone was standing beside it. Looking directly at my house. Looking directly at my window. They didn't move when I appeared. They'd been waiting for me to notice them. I didn't look away first. Neither did they. Then they held something up. Slow and deliberate. A manila envelope. Thick. Held it up long enough for me to see it clearly, then placed it against my front gate and walked back to the car. Drove away without rushing. Like they'd just completed a scheduled delivery. I waited 4 minutes before opening the front door. Walked to the gate. Picked up the envelope with hands that had stopped pretending to be steady. Inside was a photograph. Then another. Then a document I recognized immediately, the same legal agreement from the county records. But this copy was different. This one had the third party named. Fully named. My grandfather. Robert Voss had orchestrated the entire arrangement in 1969. He had forced my grandmother to sign away this house. He had paid Margaret Holloway to take it and disappear quietly. He had buried something inside these walls long before Margaret ever thought to hide her letters. The last photograph stopped everything. A woman. Young. Standing in the kitchen of this house, my kitchen. Holding an infant. On the back, 2 lines of handwriting. Margaret's daughter. Born in this house. 1969. And beneath that, a name I recognized. My mother's handwriting. My mother's signature. She hadn't just known Margaret. She had been there. I called my mother one final time. She picked up immediately. Like she'd been sitting with the phone in her hand waiting for exactly this moment. I didn't ask questions. I just read her the name on the back of that photograph. The infant. Margaret's daughter. Born 1969 in this house. My mother didn't deny it. She exhaled. Long and slow. Like she'd been holding that breath for 34 years. Then she told me everything. Margaret Holloway wasn't just a previous owner. She was my grandmother Eleanor's closest friend. And in 1969, Margaret had discovered something about my grandfather Robert, something criminal. Something that would have destroyed him completely and taken the family name with it. Robert had given her a choice. Take the house. Take money. Take silence. Or lose everything she had. Margaret took the house. But she left the letters. Every hidden word a record of what happened. Every sealed envelope a quiet act of defiance from a woman who couldn't speak but refused to disappear entirely. The infant in the photograph, Margaret's daughter, was given up that same year. Adopted out quietly. No record. No trace. My mother had witnessed it. 19 years old. Standing in this kitchen. Watching and saying nothing. I sat on the floor of that hallway. The same hallway where I'd first touched that loose panel. The house hadn't been waiting for just anyone. It had been waiting for me to come back and finally hear the woman nobody let speak. Margaret never got justice. But she made sure the truth survived her. And now, so would I.